My name is Eliza Beth Kramer. Today's topic is cultural topics related to sexual education. So I'm going to give you a little bit short history on how AIDS spread in this country. In the late 70s, a person himself was sick and wasn't feeling well. So he went to go see a doctor. The doctor researched and saw that it wasn't something that he saw daily. It was kind of weird. Gave him medicine in hopes that his client would feel better. Another person visited the doctor, and the doctor realized that they had the same symptoms, but never really knew about that. So he wrote down all the information, and he called the Federal Center for Diseases, which is the CDC. Called and asked them if they had any information about this sickness, and let them know about the symptoms. The CDC responded saying, no, they've never heard of that. So he said, okay, that's okay. I'll keep track of all the symptoms. They said, yes, please do. So then he heard of another doctor. The same thing happened. And the CDC heard from several doctors of like the same symptoms. So what they decided to do was set up a meeting in order to discuss the symptoms found. And they were discussing the different symptoms found in different people. And it just seemed like they've never heard of this sickness. But it was very important to write down all this information and investigate on the patients. So they said, oh, the first person that contracted this was a gay man. So they said, okay, let's go ahead and investigate a little bit more on the patients themselves, the symptoms, and see if they match together from like different doctors. So one of the doctors noticed specific symptoms. One of them was skin cancer, and the other one was PCP, so the problem with the pulmonary tract. So they decided to write down the virus as GRID. And GRID stands for Gay-Related Immune Deficiency. And in short, it's just GRIDs. So they continued keeping track of all the information. The CDC started getting more phone calls with different doctors with the same symptoms. So they went ahead and gathered once again. And so they decided it was really important to continue the research in order to find what caused the specific virus or the specific disease. So they went ahead and they proposed this to the federal government, and in order to get some grant money to find out how a virus was caused. The federal government said, no, not really. You guys can definitely control that yourself. There's no need for that. So they continued. The CDC continued working together with doctors very closely, taking note of specific symptoms and information. And they found something very interesting, is that a straight man contracted the virus as well. And then they noticed that a woman pregnant had the same problems. So once again, they proposed to the federal government saying, hey, this is not only impacting the gay community, but it's also impacting straight men, straight people, and also women who are pregnant. And we have yet to find what causes the virus. So the federal government actually approved, granted some money for research. They continued researching, and this was about 1981, that they changed the virus name from GRIDS to what we know now as AIDS. And that stands for attained or attracted immune deficiency syndrome, which is AIDS. And that's how that name popped up in 1981. So I continued researching in hopes of finding the cause. And AIDS continued to impact so many members of different communities. So the CDC and doctors researched a lot more, and they found 4 different causes. Sex being the first one, intercourse, blood transfusions being the second, women who were pregnant the third, and sharing the same needles for drug use being the 4th reason why. So with blood transfusions, they found a way to prevent the spread of that, and that was through Red Cross. They have a very strict filtering service that allowed them to know if there was blood that had contracted AIDS, that had AIDS, and were able to toss that out. So from there on, the Red Cross from 1981 up until now have been very strict on that. But the federal government still thought that AIDS, or the people in general thought AIDS was honestly just related to the gay community. It was their problem, and they thought it wasn't they weren't at risk for that. So federal government established different programs, contact programs, in order for that further education, in order to prevent the spread. And it wasn't successful just because of the varying amounts of cultures in America. So for example, Latinos or Spanish-speaking cultures would see English pamphlets get to their households and say, this is not related to me, it's in English, I can't read it, or it's just about the gay American white people. Other people didn't just trust and say the federal government's telling me what to do in order to prevent that. I don't trust them. So they noticed that they weren't able to get through to a lot of cultures, specifically the deaf people, just because in general the hearing population is able to receive important information through radio, TV, and different sources like that. But deaf members were not able to access that information. The only way possible was through newspapers, and those had very big terminologies that they didn't understand. So it was not getting through to them. And in result of that, a lot of deaf members were contracted with AIDS. So the federal government granted money to different organizations in order to start a pilot program. One of them was Deaf West Hollywood, which is in California and Hollywood, and GLAAD as well in LA, and granted them some money to start touching base with the deaf community. And that was done through a pilot program. So I before was actually a teacher in educating people about AIDS and contracting AIDS. And of course the deaf people were shocked, and they were thinking, wow, AIDS can really impact a lot of people, not just gay people. So they became very scared and very afraid of dying, contracting AIDS. So at first they were very defensive about that, but finally we were able to educate everyone from white, Mexican, babies, girls, boys, straight, gay, fathers, grandfathers, rich or poor, in that it can impact all of their communities. So they were more motivated in order to learn about that. And they realized that finally the way to really get across to a lot of the communities was through public service announcements on TV and using closed captionings. And so they also set up a TTY line in order to call. They had several services for testing. You were able to call these hotlines in order to find out testing areas. And they had support groups established for people that had HIV, for the different communities, and how to support them and how to help them, how to prevent it. They had various resource hotlines for those communities. So now with the ADA law that the federal government passed, the services require, they are required to offer services to disabled people, and it's their responsibilities to match deaf people, and so they're able to access any AIDS services that they need.